In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the exact month-by-month framework that you need to follow if you want to break into investment banking. This is a proven method that has gotten students into the top bulge brackets and elite boutiques. You don't need to come from a specific background, you don't need to come from a target school, and you don't need to be in finance clubs. As long as you're willing to put in the work and you have a genuine interest in finance, follow this framework and I promise you'll see results. So before we get into it, I just wanted to provide some context on how this framework came to be about. Obviously, I landed my junior summer offer at Blackstone, but I would say that at that time, I couldn't have laid out the exact steps that it would take to actually break in. It was only after I ran recruiting for my team for 4 years where I was the one who was screening the resumes, I was reviewing the hire reviews, I was conducting the first rounds, and then also sitting in on the meetings where partners and MDs were deliberating on who was going to be given the offer, that it really became clear to me what were the consistent patterns across the students that were getting offers from multiple groups. And so this framework is exactly a reflection upon what it takes to be successful based on everything that I observed from actually running recruiting. Now, one thing to note before we dive into the month-by-month framework is that while each month is designed to have a primary focus, some of this does run in parallel as you need to be doing certain things across multiple months in the background, even if the primary focus in that month is going to be something different. So the way this looks is in August, before you start your sophomore year, that's when you lay the groundwork of redoing your resume as well as coming up with your why investment banking / why finance narrative. In September, you spend the month laying the groundwork for networking, so identifying the firms that are on your target list, starting to come up with the list of alumni that you plan to reach out to, as well as strategizing around how you want to approach it over the coming months, so that from the months of October to December, you are always networking and reaching out to people in the background. Also, in that same period, you want to be laying the groundwork for your technical foundation. So you should not leave studying for technicals until the last moment. I definitely recommend that you start getting exposure to this all the way in October so that you really build a genuine understanding of these concepts instead of just trying to memorize the guides in the last moment. Then in November, I recommend really honing in on your behaviorals. And then in December is when you go back to drilling technicals so that you're interview ready, so that when applications open in January, you've already covered the full scope of prep, and now you're just tweaking and refining and iterating so that you deliver consistently in your interviews. So August is your foundation month. You're not networking yet, you're not drilling technicals yet. Instead, you're spending time nailing 2 things that are going to define the rest of your process: your resume and your narrative. Get these right and you will experience high ROI in the rest of your process. So your resume is the backbone of your entire recruiting experience. It's going to determine your response rate that you get in your networking emails. It's going to determine getting interviews, and also it's going to determine how those interviews actually go based on the questions that interviewers are going to ask you based on the resume that you have given to them. And it's really important to note that what I really mean here is at this moment in time, you want to completely redo your resume. That means a full rewrite, every single bullet, and really break it down in a way that is as detail-oriented as possible. You don't want your bullets to read as a generic job description. You really want to hone in on the specific projects that you worked on and what results came from those actions. I also think that a lot of students underestimate the value of putting non-finance related experiences on their resume. You can still highlight the experience in a way that shows that you have gained skills that are relevant for the finance job. Recruiters are looking for people and students that are well-rounded. So instead of feeling like you need to stuff a bunch of finance experiences on your resume, I highly recommend taking a step back and making sure that you're coming across as a well-rounded person that has a variety of different interests, but then also as someone who actually follows through and accomplishes things in the areas that they're most interested in. So once your resume is in shape, the next thing that you want to do is get your story down. And there's two things that your narrative needs to address. This is, why do you want to work in finance? And then what experiences have you had that make you a good fit for the role that you're applying for? So your story is something that you are going to start delivering as soon as you take networking calls. But then also it's going to serve as the foundation for every single interview that you take. So it's really important that you establish this up front and you also take the time to iterate on it so that you get to a point where the flow is very natural and authentic. You want a story that is unique to you and also memorable. Analysts and associates take calls with many students, and I would say 80% of them tell the same generic story of how they got to college, they spoke to upperclassmen, they joined some finance clubs, and now that's why they're pursuing investment banking. That is a story that is not going to serve you well, and so it's really important that you actually think critically about what are your core reasons for why you're pursuing a career in finance in the first place, and try and get creative in how you frame the story, because at the end of the day, the more interesting of a story you can tell, the more memorable it will be. And it's also really important that when you do deliver your story, you're projecting it with a lot of confidence and authenticity. People pick up on when you're telling a story that's not genuine, and also people can pick up on when you are not confident, and that makes them question if you're even cut out to be applying for roles like this in the first place. So now that your resume and elevator pitch are locked, it's time to move on to networking. I recommend approaching this in a very strategic way and not just firing off hundreds of emails starting from September. September should really just be spent strategizing on how you plan to approach the entire networking process. So what this means is identifying the firms that you're most interested in, identifying the groups within those firms that you would be interested in learning more about, and then also making a list of alumni from your school that work at those firms or specifically in those groups that you'd be interested in. And now the key here is you really want to prioritize finding alumni that you have shared background with. It's really important to note that now more than ever, investment banking has become way more competitive, and I just think that it's a lot more in the spotlight now, and you have more students applying for these roles than ever before. When I was in college at Northwestern, I'd say there were probably around 50 to 60 students going for investment banking roles. Now I think that number is probably closer to like 150 to 200. And so you can imagine analysts are going to get inbounds from way more students these days. That means that they're going to filter based on two things. One, your resume, and two, having a warm connection. So if you followed step one and your resume is in a good spot, this is definitely going to set you up to hopefully get more responses to networking emails. The first thing that I'd always do when I get inbounds from students is click on the resume. If I could tell that they were qualified for the role, I'd be definitely more inclined to reply versus someone who, again, has a resume that reads more like a generic job description. The second is the warm intro, and I cannot stress this enough. People are almost guaranteed to respond to you if you can either get an introduction through someone in your network or you have really close shared background or ties, whether it's through a club on campus or maybe a sports team, maybe coming from the same hometown, just anything that's very personal to them, so that if they receive an email where they see that that person has a very similar background to them, they're going to want to help them out because they remember being in your shoes. With networking, I personally think that it's about quality over quantity. I know that's a controversial opinion, and you'll hear a lot of people saying that you need to network. The reality is, I would say having a really strong resume and then really just trying to leverage a few connections that you can find on Wall Street based on people that actually will have your genuine interests at heart, that can actually kind of serve as a mentor to you in the process. That's what you should be aiming to achieve, not speaking to as many people as possible. Again, because recruiting is so competitive now, even if you get referrals at certain banks, such as like JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs, that doesn't even guarantee you an interview these days, just because there are so many people that are submitting referrals from having had networking conversations. So it really comes down to the strength of your resume, but then also having quality connections for people that carry weight that can actually guarantee you a first round. So I like to break down the technical preparation into 3 main buckets. The first are very closely aligned to the guides. So these are covering the core concepts that are most likely to come up in a technical investment banking interview. This includes accounting, enterprise and equity value, valuation fundamentals, discounted cash flow walkthrough, merger math, and LBOs. With these concepts, I recommend using one of the traditional guides that you probably see circulating around campus and really try and study these. So take notes on them, make a list of concepts that you're not as familiar with, and then use additional resources to try and reinforce your understanding. So don't feel like the guides are the only resources that you have available to you to learn these concepts. You also have really nice videos on YouTube or articles or even chatting a bit with ChatGPT or another LLM to really probe your understanding to make sure that you do get it and aren't just memorizing. The second thing is preparing a deal and industry walkthrough. In almost every interview that you take, you'll get asked, walk me through a deal that you followed recently, or walk me through an industry that you find interesting. And it's really important that you've prepared this and you approach this with a structured framework so that they see that you can talk the talk. And also, again, that you put in the time to prepare a question that you should know is most likely to come up in your interview. And then the third thing is about following markets and demonstrating business acumen. So questions that often come up in interviews are, what's a trend that you're following in the markets right now? Or what do you think makes a good business? Or what's a company that you'd invest in? So it's really important that not only are you focusing on investment banking fundamentals, but also taking a step back and following markets, following financial news, and making sure that you understand what makes a good business in the first place, boiling it down to fundamental business concepts. So now that you have the technical preparation in motion, come November, you should shift your focus to behaviorals. So I think a lot of students underestimate behaviorals because the questions seem easy on the surface, and they think that if they're sociable and personable, they can kind of just wing these on the spot. But what bankers are really looking for here is high emotional intelligence, and also they're looking for how you deliver these responses. And so if you can demonstrate to them that you are confident and that you've reflected on your past experiences and you're able to articulate them in a way that shows what you learned from it and how you grew, this is exactly how you can nail your behaviorals. And now more so than ever, because recruiting has pushed up to sophomore year, technicals are of course still important, but the reality is everything that you need to know for this job can be taught on the job. And so a lot of the process now has shifted towards vetting students based on their soft skills, as those are things that are less likely to be taught on the job. Just like technicals, I break down behaviorals into 3 main buckets. The first are the core motivation questions. These are questions that get asked in every interview, even if it's a technical interview. And it starts with, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to do investment banking? Why do you want to work at this firm? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Or why do you think we should hire you? The second component are your story questions. So this is, tell me about a time you did this, tell me about a time that you did that. And what they're assessing here are some key traits that they're looking for in candidates. And this can come down to your leadership skills, your communication skills, how do you handle stressful situations, how do you manage your time, how do you problem solve. And so being proactive and thinking about stories to come up with for each of these will set you up very well for the interviews. The final part has to do with your resume. So if you have a detailed resume, which you should going into every single interview, you want to be prepared to answer follow-up questions on every single bullet that you have. So you really need to put in the prep work to know your resume inside and out, because if you get asked a follow-up question and you don't know the answer and you aren't able to kind of make one up on the spot confidently, that is not going to show well for you. So now it's December and it's time to get back to technicals. Now, instead of studying the concepts in the background, taking notes, maybe studying them a bit more passively, December is really when you want to start to be practicing these technical questions out loud. The reason why I recommend doing this in December is because it is as close to the actual interviews as possible. And the reality is, if you start practicing technicals out loud in October, by the time interviews roll around in January, you're probably going to have to revisit it, and you've probably lost a few months where you weren't focusing on them because you felt like the interviews were further in the future. So in December, start having your mock interviews, start practicing answering out loud. Remember, interviews are, of course, person to person, and so it's one thing to be looking at flashcards and closing your eyes and trying to answer these technical questions in your head, but it's another thing to actually start practicing them out loud. And so I recommend allocating all of December to getting yourself ready to answer these live. And so now that takes you to January, when the apps will be open and the interviews will kick off. So at this point, all you need to be doing is reviewing the preparation that you've done on the behavioral and technical side, leveraging the connections you made to try and secure your first rounds, and then also iterating and refining after every single first round and super day that you take, so that you continue learning and growing in your presentation of these responses in these interviews. So that's the full framework. I hope you found it helpful. And I just wanted to note that while the framework is built around investment banking recruiting, there are a wide variety of finance roles that now follow the same early recruiting timeline. And this framework can be applied to any other role, with the caveat that your technical preparation might be a little bit different depending on the area that you are interested in. But this framework is going to get you 80% of the way there. I recommend that every student who wants a job in finance, whether it's investment banking or not, follow this framework and then make adjustments based on the specific interviews that they receive or the roles and industries that they're targeting. So if you want the full recruiting roadmap, I've linked it for free in the bio below. And if you find this interesting, please subscribe. I'm going to be continuing to break down each step of the recruiting process that I covered in this video. So I'll see you in the next one.